right, everybody, welcome back to Sip and Talk. It's your host, and we're going to dive into one of those topics that kind of makes you go, wait a minute.
And I'm here too, as always, trying to make sense of it all. I don't know about today's topic, though. It might be a bit beyond even me.
Yeah, this time we're tackling a listener favorite, consciousness and the soul. Apparently, a lot of you out there are wrestling with this whole who are we, what happens after we die thing. And we've got a stack of articles, research papers, even some ancient philosophical texts piled up here. So we're going to try to sort through it all and see what makes sense.
Well, let's not promise any definitive answers, but I do think we can unpack some interesting ideas from both the scientific and religious perspectives, maybe even see where those viewpoints overlap a bit.
Sounds like a plan. I've got my cosmic tea ready, for those moments when our minds are truly blown. So let's get into it. First things first, what does science actually say about consciousness? Is it all just about our brains working their magic?
Yeah, that's the thing. Science sees consciousness as an emergent property of the brain. Consciousness arises. We don't fully understand how it happens, but we can see that when certain parts of the brain are damaged, consciousness is affected.
So, like, if someone has a stroke that affects a particular part of their brain, their personality could change. Or they might have trouble speaking or remembering things.
Exactly. It's almost like different parts of the brain contribute to different aspects of consciousness. There's even this concept called the neural correlates of consciousness, where researchers are actually trying to pinpoint the specific neural activity that corresponds to certain conscious experiences, like what's happening in your brain when you see the color red or feel a sense of joy.
Okay. But that makes me wonder, if scientists could map out my entire brain, would they be able to predict everything about me? My thoughts, my feelings, my favorite pizza toppings?
That's a really interesting question. And it gets to the heart of what some scientists are trying to figure out. There's this neuroscientist, Anil Seth, who's proposed a brain-guessing model of consciousness. He suggests that our brains are constantly making predictions about the world, based on our senses and past experiences.
So, like, if I see a fuzzy shape in the corner of my eye, my brain is already guessing that's probably the cat, based on what it's learned before.
Exactly. And Seth argues that this process of prediction and interpretation is basically what creates our conscious experience of the world. It's like our brains are constantly building a model of reality, and that model is our consciousness.
Okay, that makes a certain kind of sense. But if it's all just neurons firing and predictions happening, where does the concept of a soul fit in? Like that part of us that feels eternal, that we think might live on after our physical bodies die?
Well, that's where things get a bit tricky. From a purely scientific standpoint, there's no empirical evidence to support the existence of a soul as a separate entity from the brain. Like you said, if we could map out every neuron and every connection in your brain, would we find a little soul compartment tucked away somewhere? Probably not.
So science is saying it's all about the brain.
Yeah.
And that's it. No magical soul floating around.
Yeah, pretty much. The soul is more of a concept that comes from religion and spirituality.
Right. Okay, so let's switch gears for a moment and look at how different religions view the soul. Because let's be real, a lot of people around the world find comfort and meaning in the idea that some part of them continues on after death.
Absolutely. And there are so many different beliefs out there. Like in Christianity, the soul is often seen as a divine gift from God, something immortal that will return to him after you die. There's the idea of heaven and hell, judgment day, all that.
Right. And it's not just Christianity. Like Buddhism talks about reincarnation. The soul keeps getting reborn into different forms of life until it reaches enlightenment and breaks free from that cycle.
Exactly. And then you've got Hinduism with its concept of the Atman, which is the individual soul, and the Brahman, which is like this universal consciousness or divine energy. It's this idea that we're all part of something much bigger than ourselves.
Okay. So we've got science saying it's all about the brain and religion offering all these different interpretations of the soul. It's like two completely different ways of looking at the same question.
It is. But I think it's important to remember that science and religion aren't always in complete opposition. They're approaching the same mysteries from different angles. And sometimes their findings even start to overlap a bit.
Overlap? You mean there are areas where science and religion actually seem to agree on this whole consciousness thing?
Well, maybe not agree exactly, but there are definitely some areas where things get interesting. And the lines start to blur a little.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
So before the break, we were teasing you with the idea that science and religion might actually have some common ground when it comes to consciousness.
Yeah, that's right. We left everyone hanging on a cliffhanger. So spill the tea. Are you saying there's actually scientific evidence for the soul?
Well, not exactly evidence for the soul in the traditional religious sense, but there are some fascinating areas of research that raise questions about consciousness that science can't fully explain yet.
Okay. You've got my attention. Give me an example.
Have you ever heard of near-death experiences, or NDEs?
Of course. It's like those stories where people say they saw a bright light or felt like they were floating above their own bodies during a medical emergency. Some even claim to have met deceased loved ones. It's pretty wild stuff.
Right. And for a long time, these experiences were dismissed as hallucinations or tricks of the mind. But here's the thing. There are a growing number of cases where people report details about their NDEs that they couldn't have known otherwise, like they accurately describe conversations that happened in the operating room while they were clinically dead, or they recall specific events that were later confirmed by witnesses.
Hold on, you're telling me there are people who are essentially brain dead with no measurable brain activity who are still able to perceive and remember things? That's pretty mind-blowing.
It is, and it challenges our traditional understanding of consciousness as being solely dependent on brain function. Some researchers propose that these NDEs suggest that consciousness might be able to exist independently of the brain, at least under certain circumstances.
Okay, but if consciousness can exist without a functioning brain, what does that mean for the soul? Are we talking about the same thing here?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Some people believe that NDEs provide evidence for the existence of a soul that can detach from the body and continue on after death. Others argue that there might be scientific explanations we haven't discovered yet, like maybe some form of quantum consciousness that operates outside the realm of classical physics.
All right. I'm trying to wrap my head around all this. So we've got NDEs suggesting that consciousness might not be limited to the brain. But then we have science saying it's all about neurons firing. And on top of that, we have religion offering all these different interpretations of the soul. Where do we even go from here?
Well, it seems like we're moving into an era where technology is blurring the lines even further. Have you heard about mind uploading?
Isn't that like a sci-fi concept?
Yeah.
Where you transfer your consciousness into a computer? Sign me up. No more traffic jams, and I could finally have a perfectly organized digital closet.
Well, it's not quite that simple. And we're definitely not at the point where you can just upload your brain to the cloud. But the basic idea is that if we can map out the entire structure and function of your brain, all those neural connections, memories, everything, we might be able to create a digital replica of your consciousness.
Okay. It's pretty wild. But would that digital version actually be me? Or just a copy?
That's the big philosophical debate, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we perfectly replicate your brain, would that digital entity have the same subjective experience as you? Would it feel like anything to be that digital version of you?
You're really making me think here. It's like we can imagine creating a digital copy of my brain, but would that copy have my sense of humor, my love of bad reality TV, my fear of spiders? Would it be conscious in the same way that I am?
And that brings us to the concept of qualia, the subjective qualitative experiences of consciousness. Like, we can both look at a sunset and agree that it's beautiful, but how we each experience that beauty, the actual feeling of it, might be subtly different. Could a digital copy of your brain truly capture those qualia?
This is getting deep. And I feel like we're just scratching the surface. We haven't even talked about what happens to consciousness or the soul after death.
We haven't, and there's so much to explore there. Different religious beliefs, philosophical theories, even the possibility of digital afterlives. If mind uploading becomes a reality, it seems like every answer just leads to more questions.
It's like we're falling down a rabbit hole of consciousness. But I'm loving this journey. And you know what? I think we need to dedicate a whole other part of this episode to just diving into those possibilities.
I agree. We've given our listeners a lot to ponder already, but there's so much more to unpack.
All right, everyone, stay tuned for part 3 of our deep dive into consciousness and the soul, where we'll explore the great beyond digital immortality, and maybe even try to figure out if a digital copy of me would still crave pizza. Welcome back, deep thinkers, to the final part of our exploration into consciousness and the soul. We've gone from neurons firing to near-death experiences, even dipped our toes into the wild world of mind uploading.
It's been quite a journey. And yet, after all that, I feel like we're still circling around the biggest mystery of all. What happens to consciousness after death?
Right. It's the ultimate unknown. Does consciousness just end? Or does some part of us, maybe that soul we were talking about, continue on in some form?
Well, as we discussed earlier, science doesn't really have a definitive answer on that. If consciousness is simply a product of the brain, then logically it would cease to exist when the brain dies.
Makes sense from a purely biological perspective.
Yeah.
But then you have all these different religious and spiritual traditions offering a wide range of beliefs about the afterlife.
Exactly. And these beliefs often provide comfort and meaning for people. Like in Christianity, you have the idea of the soul going to heaven or hell, depending on how you lived your life.
And in Buddhism, there's the concept of reincarnation, where the soul is reborn into a new life based on karma, the actions of past lives, like a cosmic recycling program for consciousness.
And then you have Hinduism, with its idea that the individual soul, the Atman, eventually merges back into the Brahman. The universal consciousness. It's like a drop of water returning to the ocean.
Okay, so we've got science saying consciousness might just stop, and religion offering various versions of an afterlife. But then there's that whole mind uploading thing we were discussing. Could that potentially create a kind of digital afterlife?
It's a fascinating possibility, right? Imagine if we could upload our consciousness to a computer, essentially create a digital backup of ourselves. Would that digital entity continue to experience consciousness even after our physical bodies are gone?
That's a mind-boggling thought. We could be having digital tea parties in the cloud for all eternity. But seriously, if technology ever gets to that point, it would raise so many ethical and philosophical questions.
Absolutely. Like, would that digital entity really be you, with your unique experiences and memories? Or just a copy? And what would happen to the concept of death if we could potentially live on forever in digital form?
It's like we're on the verge of a whole new era of existence, where the lines between life and death, physical and digital, become increasingly blurred. It's both exciting and a little terrifying.
I think exciting and terrifying is a pretty good summary of this whole topic, wouldn't you say?
Totally. So where does this leave us? After all this exploration, what's the takeaway for our listeners?
Well, I don't think we have any definitive answers, and that's okay. What matters is that we keep asking these big questions, keep exploring different perspectives, and keep an open mind. Whether you lean more towards a scientific religious or somewhere in between understanding, the journey of inquiry itself is incredibly valuable.
Beautifully said. I think the mystery is part of what makes life so fascinating. And who knows, maybe someday science will unlock the secrets of consciousness. Or maybe we'll all be sipping virtual cosmic tea with our uploaded selves in the digital afterlife.
Stranger things have happened.
That's for sure. But for now, let's appreciate the mystery and keep those deep thoughts flowing. And hey, if you're feeling overwhelmed by all this existential pondering, we highly recommend checking out the YouTube channel Mickytolife. For some lighthearted travel and drink reviews, it's the perfect way to unwind after a deep dive into the mysteries of consciousness.
Absolutely. Mickey's videos are always a delight.
All right, everyone, that's it for this episode of Sip and Talk. Stay curious, stay open-minded, and we'll catch you next time.
Cheers to that.